are back with comedian David Boyle, and I'm quitting alcohol. So we're back with another episode of The Process. I think this is installment number 6. So the process is basically I'm taking you through, as best as I can remember, the long, drawn-out, arduous, fucking decade-long, 12-year-long roller coaster that led me to my final decision to never drink again. So last week I was rebuilding myself. I'd hit rock bottom and I was in the process of beginning a rebuild. So I did that. I decided to quit drinking for 6 weeks, eat good, try and get healthy, try and get fit. Signed up for stand-up comedy, started doing fucking guitar lessons. That was the rebuild. So that was going good. It's surprising how quickly you can turn things around. It always amazes me how quickly things do turn around. And I say always amazes me because I've had to turn things around more than once. But this was my first experience of it. So I'd lost a bit of weight. I'd started doing stand-up. I'd done a couple of gigs. I'd learnt G and E and C on guitar. And I had come to the end of the 6 weeks of no drinking. So I was like, all right, I'm good now. Let's have a little bit of a celebration. I'm a brand new man. That was my mentality. I thought 6 weeks resets the clock. Like if I take 6 weeks off, that will undo the previous decade of alcohol abuse and drug abuse. And I'll come out the other end basically an embryo, a newborn Boyle. That's how dumb I was. No, not necessarily dumb. Let's say naive. I had no fucking idea how any of it worked. I was even dumber than that, more naive than that. I thought if you took a couple of weekends off, you're all right. If you took 2 weekends off in a row, you're fucking fine. So at this point, I still really had no concept of what alcohol does or is. How it really affects you, I still really didn't figure that out for another 5 or 6 years. So after the 6 weeks, I started drinking again, and that's when I almost immediately started falling back into old habits. Bad habits, old habits. So at the beginning, after the 6 weeks, I continued trying to do everything. I continued trying to eat well. I continued trying to go to the gym. I continued trying to do stand-up comedy gigs. I continued trying to do guitar. So it was the first time I would have experienced that you just fall back into the same habits. I wasn't conscious of it because that's the other thing the booze does. It makes you not care. So at the start, after the 6 weeks, you start drinking, still going to the gym. Then the next week, you're drinking 3-4 nights a week. You skip a couple of gym sessions. You hung over a few times. You start eating shit. You start missing a couple of the guitar lessons because it's like a 45-minute train ride. The train costs like $3.80, $7.60 return. I'm like, that's too expensive to be doing like 3 days a week. So the guitar starts falling off. You go into a couple of stand-up comedy gigs, but you're so fucking nervous. You're mainly just drinking. A few weeks later, you haven't been to the gym in like 2 weeks now. You're constantly eating shit. You're drinking. You're always hungover. KFC's around the corner. It's the easiest fucking thing to do. The string on your guitar broke. You don't know how to fix it, so you've fucked off the guitar now. You're still going to gigs every now and then, but you're not really gigging. You're more just drinking. So about 6 weeks after your 6 weeks off, you're like, fuck, I'm in the exact same position I was before I quit drinking. You're still bragging about your 6 weeks off, but people are looking at you going, well, you're still the same piece of shit you were before you took the 6 weeks off. So it obviously hasn't worked, but by the time that 6 weeks is in, you're back into the groove. Your ego is on rocket fuel. It starts making excuses. You start listening to the excuses. Fuck the cunts at the gym. They're all fucked anyway. Fuck those cunts. I hate fucking guitarists. Fuck guitarists. This is what I love doing. I love drinking. I love going out. I love having a good time. Why don't I just continue doing this? But here's the rub. Consciously, you're thinking all this shit. Subconsciously, now you know. Consciously, you can tell yourself all this shit, but your subconscious is doing all the math in the background. It's going, well, we just stopped drinking and doing positive shit for 6 weeks and things were going pretty good. Now we stopped doing the positive shit and started drinking again and things are back to where they were. Your subconscious tries to tell you this, but you just ignore it. That's what the drink's for. Push down that subconscious. So you're ignoring it, but you feel uneasy. You always feel uneasy after this because you know now. Even if you don't consciously know, even if your dumb fucking brain hasn't figured it out, you know, deep down you know. So there's always this fucking uneasiness. So I just started drinking again, and within no time, I was back to where I was. I was drinking hard, I was fighting with my friends, I was a fucking mess. I got myself back into a giant rut, I put on heaps of weight, I was generally unhealthy, I couldn't get out of bed before like fucking 1 p.m. I was just doing nothing again, I was in a rut, but things had got more extreme now. I needed more to get my kicks, if you know what I mean. I couldn't just sit in a fucking bar and drink. I didn't need friends anymore. I could just drink by myself happily. This is when I started drinking with homeless people a lot. Just sitting on the street with homeless people, just fucking drinking. It was starting to get dark. It wasn't like drinking beforehand. Now it had a sinister type feel to it. And I didn't really give a fuck. I was ignoring everything. I was starting to spiral pretty badly. I was in that mode where you start shedding everything besides the booze. I didn't need anything besides the booze. I was in a bigger rut than I was before. That generally happens too. When you quit and you go back, it exacerbates all your problems. And you come back with a vengeance as well with the drinking. You go back to where you were plus some. So in the middle of this rut, my mate Cal gives me a call. And he's like, me and Sconna are going to go to the US. Do you want to come? And luckily, I was still a fucking thief. And I had nothing else to do. So I'm like, yeah, I had no money at the time. And I had nothing else to do. So over the next month, I stole enough money to buy a ticket overseas and a bit of spending money. And I was heading to the US with no real fucking idea what the fuck I was going to do. But I went 2 weeks early so I could go to LA and do a little bit of stand-up. I'd maybe done 8 gigs up until then. So I was basically back to where I was before. I was basically running away again overseas, but it was different this time. I wasn't lying to myself. Well, I was a little bit with the comedy thing, like going to LA 2 weeks early to do some comedy. I ended up doing a gig in LA, but at the Laugh Factory, but it wasn't on the same level of lying to myself as I was before. So I was kind of back in the exact same place I was before, but it had a different texture to it. So I was going overseas, but I wasn't running away. I just had nothing else to do. I was drinking every night, but it wasn't a party. It was kind of sinister. So it kind of looked identical as to where I was before, but it had taken a little bit of a turn for worse. What looked like a turn for worse, but as part of the process to quitting drinking, I had actually advanced. I had taken a step forward. It didn't look like a step forward, but in the grand scheme of things, when you look at the whole picture, it was a step forward. And at times you think to yourself, I should have just stopped drinking forever then during those 6 weeks. But you know what? In this little period, I met my wife for the first time when I was fucking hammered. So to say I should have just quit drinking completely then forever, it doesn't work like that. That's not how life works. Life isn't black and white. So that's why I call the whole thing a process, because if I was sober, I would never have been at that bar at that time. I would never have had the courage to walk up to her and say, "You're the most beautiful girl I've ever seen. I'll marry you today." That's why I'm calling it a process. The whole thing is one big process. That 6 weeks, that little period was just the first little step. I still didn't understand a single fucking thing about anything. So off I went to the US, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and was crushed almost immediately. So then it was time for take 2. I'm going to have to give this quitting alcohol shit another go. So we'll get into that next week. Take 2, my second attempt. But that will do for tonight. If you're enjoying the podcast, share it around with your friends. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you the fuck later.